Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Beacon Way podcast. I'm your host, Adrienne Wilkerson, and I'm really excited today to have our guest on, John Sanders. He is with Rev Key Digital, and we're going to be digging into paid ads, specifically Google paid ads today. What's changing, how AI is affecting everything and changing up our whole world and what's working and what's not these days. So, John, thank you so much for joining us and our listeners today as we dig into this.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about you and your path and what got you into doing Google Ads specifically. And I know one of your specialties is very much in the mental health space, just like ours is. So tell us a little bit about kind of what prompted you into that side, particular niche of the industry.
Sure. So probably goes back to about 2015. I'm taking a job as a Google paid ads manager at a marketing agency specializing in dentistry. And then at the same time, my wife is going out on her own at that point and starting her testing psychology practice. So I'm doing digital ads during the day for a dentist and then at night for mental health. And then I started picking up some mental health clients on the side here and there. And then in 2018, I decided I didn't want to work for people anymore and I wanted to do my own thing. And so I started Rev Key. Fast forward several years later, I've got 9 account managers who help mostly mental health practitioners run ads. About 90% of our business is in the mental health space. And just watching all the changes that Google has made over that time that I know that we really want to talk about. But that's kind of how I ended up getting here. And I feel like a lot of us end up kind of in this. It's you're either a therapist and you start a second business, or you're the partner of a therapist and you help them, and then that just ends up steamrolling and becoming a business one day.
I think you're so right. When we got to talk before, we were laughing because that is very similar to my story. Many of our listeners know my husband was an addiction recovery counselor for many years, and I grew up with a therapist as a father who just retired last year after 30 years. Just to absolutely agree. It's usually there's something adjacent there that I think really gives us a heart for this industry specifically for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dig in with the elephant we're all can't avoid anymore. What are you seeing in your world for Google Ads specifically? How is AI affecting what you guys do? How is it affecting, search user behavior? What are you seeing that's happening in your side of the world?
Well, I think the main thing that Google is doing now is moving more towards looking at a user's intent and kind of what they're looking for, instead of just looking for somebody saying therapy near me. They're kind of looking at that overall search journey. And so and it's been very sad for old school Google Ads people like me, but search campaigns are not super viable anymore. The cost per click on them just continues to increase.
Right.
There's definitely things that Google has tried to do. They introduced AI Max, which is supposed to get some of that intent learning in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we've just recently started experimenting with. But really, for a lot of our ads these days, we're using a lot of Performance Max ads where the cost per click tends to be a little lower, and you're getting a little more of some of that top of funnel search, which is a little different strategy than what we used to do with search, for sure. But just even today, just talking to some of my account managers, it was very clear that search campaigns that had worked really well in the past, the cost per click has doubled on those in the last 18 months, and it just makes them not usable in a lot of cases now.
Yeah, that's definitely aligns with what we're seeing for sure. So when we talk about, because we're marketers, we talk the same language, we get this.
Right.
Let's dig in a little bit to what does it mean? Because I say this all the time, and I had a client call me out on it the other day, and I was like, yeah, you're right. He's like, what do you mean intent? And what does that mean? And I was like, Right. Okay. So walk us through kind of what the traditional way was with keywords and focus there, and what we mean when we say now there's an intent behind it, because it's a fascinating journey that AI has kind of forced on all the search engines and us as marketers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we go back 5, 10 years ago when we were using these exact match keywords and said,
Right.
only show this ad if the customer
Hmm.
types in therapy near me into Google. And so it was really just based on, what keywords they were using. But now Google is looking at that user, and somebody who starts off with a search that says, am I sad? Am I depressed?
Right.
Which in a lot of cases, and back in a search campaign context, in a lot of cases, I don't necessarily want those, because if I'm paying, $8 to $10 for each of those clicks, I want something
Right.
that says counseling, therapy, treatment.
Right. Because they're farther down the funnel at that
Right.
point, essentially. Yeah.
But if I'm only paying $2, $3, $4, I can open myself up to a little bit more of that. And so that
Hmm.
user who searches, am I depressed, may end up at some point searching depression therapy near me. And so, like, I think
Right.
that that's kind of the intent side that
Hmm.
we're looking at, and kind of paying attention to that. And if they type in enough things that say, I am depressed, at some point they're going to show them an ad that talks about therapy.
Right. Right. I think it's for those of us that have been, in this industry and seen the ebbs and flows. It's fascinating to me too, as somebody who had a very analog childhood and a digital adulthood. I remember when we first, I laugh with my son. I'm like, I'm older than Google. Kind of a thing,
Right.
and
Yes.
when we had to learn how to use Google, and how now we're having to learn how to prompt AI, but it was a learning curve even back in the day. I think about how awkward, if you will, the keywords that I would type into Google were. I had to guess at what the best keywords were going to be to try to get the answer I wanted. And that was a very frustrating experience at first. And as we got better about keywords and Google got better about anticipating user needs, that evolved to become second nature. And now we're seeing a whole new evolution of that, where we're all having to learn how to prompt, which parallels essentially learning how to get the right keywords to get the right answer we're looking for. And so it's a sophisticated, I think, evolution. Cause like you said, now we're going, am I depressed? Am I, or do I have bipolar disorder? Or what could be the result of these symptoms I'm having, kind of a thing. And it's just a much more sophisticated thing, but it does change and affect how we do ads. And I don't know if you're seeing this, but one of the things that we're seeing is a lot bigger emphasis on essentially branding, and getting the word out there and making sure that, like you said, eventually you type in, am I depressed enough? And you're going to get an ad for depression, but there's a certain amount of kind of brand awareness that never used to be part of Google ads. We were laughing about this before, the microwave versus the oven. And that's kind of shifting with more of the brand awareness. Is that kind of something that you're seeing as well?
One of the things that I really feel like now is, because I used to run these search campaigns, and I told
Hmm.
Google, do this and then this will happen. That's
Right.
not happening as much anymore, because
Mm-mm.
we're giving Google, literally, if you look inside Google Ads, in some places it calls some of the signals that we give hints. we're
Right.
giving we're giving Google a hint, and then Google is going off and doing its own thing with that.
Right.
So I feel like, in many ways, I'm more like my friends on the search engine optimization side, who used to do this thing where I was like, okay, we'll do
Yeah,
this to influence Google to do this. And so now, as
absolutely.
a paid search marketer, I'm having to learn that side, and it takes some getting used to, because I'm used to
It
saying do
does.
this and do that, and letting go of some of that control
Right.
is a little difficult, because in a lot of cases it does work. I mean, sometimes Google will steer some things down the wrong path, but in a lot of cases it does actually work. So it's kind of pulling off the stick a little bit, and letting Google do its thing, and we're kind of more of, you know giving it guardrails.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I love that. So, are you seeing as we're kind of going through this evolution, are you having to kind of extend, if you will, the runway of when results are happening? I mean, as far as telling the clients, because like I said, it used to be more of a microwave thing where like we turn these things on, you're hitting bottom of the funnel for the most part. You're going to be getting a lot more response a lot faster. Are you also seeing kind of a longer runway with these shifts, or is the runway kind of similar for you?
I think maybe in some ways it's longer. And as we discover new things about how these performance max ads work, I think that shortens it a little bit, just because they're more complicated in the fact that they can show in those traditional Google search places, but they can also show on YouTube or Google
Right.
Discovery or display advertising, which we try to kill all of that as soon as we find it, just because generally we know that that's not high converting
Hmm.
traffic. And so you might have a case where you give Google a set of signals, and then Google turns around and starts trying to do a bunch of display advertising for you. And you have to go, oh,
Yes.
okay, no, 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 that's not what we were
Right.
talking about. Let's go back over here.
Right.
The
Wrong
search,
guardrails. Come back.
yeah, we don't want you to do that. So, um, I mean, I think one of the things that is also nice about these performance max ads is because I'm seeing kind of an average of right now I'd probably say about $3 to $4 is your cost per click. But I mean,
Hmm.
even 4 or 5 years ago, when we were looking in search, it was more like five to six for a search campaign. So you can end up with some more
Right.
clicks. So I mean, I think that maybe that balances it out a little, because you can get so much data, or you can get a little more data faster because you
Hmm.
are getting those clicks for less money. But there's definitely a lot more, pushing and pulling, and once you've got those old search campaigns going, like they pretty much, unless Google really broke something, you know, would really kind of continue to be the same. Whereas these, I feel like you're constantly having to ride herd on. Just even like this year, at the start
Mm.
of the year, Google decided to try to take all of your images and headlines and start to make these like really atrocious, like
Right.
15-second videos to put in their YouTube like inventory, and they're
Hmm.
really bad.
They
So
really were.
this
Yeah.
year, so like the last month and a half, we've been like trying to stomp that out as much as
Yeah.
possible, because that's not really what we want. Also, it's kind
Right.
of an encouragement from Google that says, hey, maybe you should make a video instead of us trying to do it for you.
Yes. I know we're running into that on the Meta ad side too, where Meta's really pushing their AI ad creation platform. And it's like, we're not opposed to it, but it's so bad. I mean, the
It's
material that it's coming up with is
Yeah,
bland. It's mundane. This is, we use a phrase a lot in digital marketing. You got to stop the scroll. This for, display ads for, more graphic stuff. That's the point. You got to stop the scroll. And I'm just like, nothing coming out of Meta's AI is going to stop a scroll. It just looks like everything else. So it's frustrating when I feel like these companies, they're also experimenting with AI, which I appreciate. But when they are trying to force us to use it and it's not, the quality is not there yet, that's a really frustrating kind
right.
of place to be in. And so we've run across it some like what you're talking about. But we're definitely fighting it a lot on the Meta side, where the amount of times it pops up, you want us to know we don't want you to do it. You're not there yet.
Right.
Maybe
So
someday, but you're not there yet.
are you saying you don't want to pay to be a beta user for something? And Google does
you
the same thing.
know,
They're
it
constantly pushing
is.
us to.
They're constantly pushing. There is some I like being betas, and experimenting with stuff, but not at the expense of our clients, kind of a thing.
Right.
And not when you can't, when they feel like they're trying to not give you a choice. That's always fun because,
Right.
yeah, I was
I
like,
think
yeah, I don't think our clients want to pay to perfect your system.
And I think Google's been pretty good about that, like where you can
Hmm.
opt out of a lot of that. And I usually do, just because anytime you're in an industry like ours that has regulations, because you can't call
Right.
a master's level therapist a psychologist, just that example right
Exactly.
there. And I
Yeah.
saw that happen in one of Google's first iterations of them
Mm.
trying to write ads all the way back in 2019. And once I saw that, I was like, yeah, I'm never allowing them to do this.
Yeah.
And so that is one thing targeting wise. Yeah, we will let Google go on some of that, but some of that ad copy side, I'm really holding on to that one pretty tightly and not letting
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. No, I think you're really wise on that because, like you said, there's nuances within the mental behavioral health addiction world that don't exist in any other industry. Not that other industries don't have their nuance, but there's some really touchy areas with HIPAA and PHI and making sure you got the right title, like you said, that aligns with it, that could have a lot more significant consequences than, say, a plumber if we get the
Right.
wrong, we use the wrong wrench term. Not the
Right.
end of the world.
Or even like Google just going in and saying like best therapist in such and such area. And a lot of therapists are going to
Right.
be very uncomfortable with that language. Now, in under other industries, they would love to say that, but no therapist is ever, or very few therapists are going to probably be okay with that type of language.
Agreed.
But that's the sort of thing that AI would do. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm
Yeah, that's a great example.
just not turning over ad creation to them because of that.
Yes, definitely. So, what if you had to make some predictions about Google Ads, especially and AI? Do you think we're going to start seeing the Google Ads above Gemini's recommendations or woven into it? I know ChatGPT is trying to launch its own ad platform right now. So, you know, we always get asked for predictions, and I'm always like, well, this is my take in this one sliver of a moment. And it's probably going to be different tomorrow because everything changes. But as of today, what are you thinking? What is your gut telling you for kind of what's coming down the pipe, as you will?
I do think that Google's going to do that just because 75% of their revenue is derived from advertising. So
Right.
I think it's inevitable that they're going to do that at some point. There was a little bit of controversy last year. I think some Google reps told some people that that was going to happen. The head of Google advertising
Mm.
came out and said, "No, we're not doing that yet." But
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
kind of think that that's inevitable, that you're going to start seeing those ads kind of at the bottom of some of those results. Like after
Mm.
Gemini asks you a question, after that you might, especially if you're talking about products with it, it's going to give you some
Mhm.
of those shopping ads. And I think that the Chat GPT ads will look at least somewhat similar. I don't think it is going to be woven into the narrative. You and I were laughing about some of the Super Bowl commercials that
Yes.
apparently they made Sam Altman. He laughed and then he said that they were disingenuous. And maybe he's probably right on that. I don't think that they're going to integrate it like that, but I think you
Yeah.
are going to have those boxes down at the bottom that is going to say that. And ChatGPT is probably the most important one, just because
Mhm.
as of right now, they're about 80% of the AI market. Google Gemini
Right.
is fairly small. Anthropic is coming along, but famously has
Mhm.
not said they won't do ads. So we'll see how long they can stick to that. But
Be interesting.
so I do think that we're going to see Google ads in there, um, and I don't even think it's going to be something we have to actively do. I think that they're going to just take some of the placements that we already have in some of these other places, and they're going
Mm.
to they're going to use that, and they're going to create those ads. But we'll see what that looks like. We'll see what ChatGPT's looks like. And like I said, that's
Yeah.
probably the more consequential of the two.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm figuring however ChatGPT ends up rolling them out will probably set a standard for others. But which is interesting because historically, Google's been the one setting the trend, setting the standard for a lot of this stuff. So it is interesting how much they are trailing in this whole AI world,
Yeah,
considering how big
ChatGPT
they've gotten. Yeah,
Well, ChatGPT hits in about 2023, and it comes up for what Google was calling Bard before it called it Gemini, and then
right.
they just had what I guess we would call the first mover advantage, and they have
Hmm.
not let go of that brand recognition, because most everyone calls it GPTs or chats or something along those
Hmm.
lines.
Yeah.
yeah, it's going to be a struggle for Google or Anthropic or any of these other AIs, many of whom also had Super Bowl commercials. Some of whom, like,
Yes.
I'd never heard. I think of Spark Gen. I was like, I don't know this.
Yeah.
So I think all of them have a lot of catching up to do on the
Hmm.
brand side with ChatGPT.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I mean, you speaking of, them kind of trailing Google trailing the leader, they did that with social too and tried to launch their own social platform. And,
That
it
interesting.
became a social platform for Google employees only kind of a thing because just nobody used it. And they finally sunset. They kind of can't get away with that with AI, but it is interesting that, when they've been trailing in the past, it seems like they've really struggled to get caught up. But they are the juggernaut. So that's kind of an interesting juxtaposition there.
And there's still a lot more search in Google and traditional search engines than there is AIs.
Hmm.
But that gap will slowly start to close. I will say,
Hmm.
as somebody who does use Google Gemini, it got a lot better after the most recent update. I think there was from
Good.
2.5 to 3.5, big jump in quality. There's the product, but then there's also kind of, once again, the branding side of things,
Hmm.
which, as we've discussed, they've kind of been behind on the whole time and
Hmm.
are still struggling to catch up.
Yeah. Well, that's good timing for them because I mean, ChatGPT's 5 has gotten terrible reviews and feedback. I know a lot of my team uses, the high paid version of it. And I don't think a single one of them, a few of them have tried to go back to 4 or 4.5 because 5 was so bad. So hopefully that'll open the market up a little bit for others to like Gemini, like Anthropic, like Gronk, like Perplexity to gain a little bit of market share there and keep, the competition going. Cause that's the piece that I think is the most important. We don't need another monopoly. We need that competition to push them and to kind of for an accountability piece too. I think that's kind of important in every industry.
Right. And I mean, they're trying to be everything to everyone, but there's definitely, certain people prefer certain things. Like, I think Claude does the best job of, like, if I need to, like, write some content or an email, I think Claude does a really excellent job. Whereas, more of like a spreadsheet task might be better in Gemini or ChatGPT or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and I think that as those differences become apparent, we're gonna be using those for different things, as
Mhm.
opposed to just a Swiss Army knife approach to, with all of these AIs.
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective. My team was laughing at me the other day because we were all talking about the different AIs because there's about 4 or 5 that are used. Like I like Perplexity and Claude, and we've got other people that prefer Gronk or prefer Gemini. And so we were having a really fun discussion, and I was laughing. I'm like, well, not everybody likes Nikes, and Nikes don't fit my feet well. Adidas do. So I'm going to stick with my Adidas, and they were laughing. They're like, can we quote you on that? You just compared AI to a running shoe. I'm like, well, if the shoe fits, let's, let's run with it,
Well
but
done. Well done.
yeah, I know. It was one of those like, I gotta remember that because that was a good one. Right, exactly. So they were all laughing at me, but I mean, it just really reinforces what you were saying that we know this in marketing. You can't be all things to all people, and we say it a lot. Everybody is nobody. So I do think there does need to continue to be specialization and a place for, like you said, certain AIs seem to be developing better at doing certain things. And I think that's probably very much the way it should be. I know that's the natural bent that happens in business. You can't, again, be all things to all people. You kind of got to pick your niche. And like we were talking about last time we connected, sometimes you can niche down too much. And sometimes, you kind of got to find that sweet spot where there's a big enough market And yet, you're specific enough for your voice to stand out and for there to be some distinctive elements that we can really dig into as marketers. So it is interesting to see how kind of AI is following a similar pattern in a way, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're still in very much kind of an early adopter stage. The main people who are using it are, marketers, therapists, mental health professionals really seem to have embraced AI, and then
Hmm.
particular tech people. There's still a large segment of the population who really probably hasn't done much with that at all.
Right.
My in-laws, they don't really know this
Right.
stuff. This is all voodoo to them. Um,
Yes.
so we're still very much in the early days, and like you said, anything that we say today could be completely blown up and irrelevant in 6 months.
Right. Absolutely. Well, just to kind of wrap up, one of the things I always like to kind of throw out there is if there was like one thing you could share with a potential client, like what would you tell them to ask if they're interviewing agencies? Like, is there one thing that you're like, look for this, or make sure you don't hear this or see this? Is there any advice you might have for our listeners for kind of something maybe pivotal or really important to, as
I'd
they're looking
say
for an agency?
I would say there are two things. So one, I'm really very big on, as a customer, I think you probably need to own your Google Ads account. And if
Mm,
it is owned by the agency, that can sometimes be a red flag. Just because I want you to be able to see like what I'm doing and not have to depend on us sending you a
mm,
bunch of reports. And then I think the second thing would be is kind of the communication piece, because
mm.
oftentimes when I'm talking to potential new customers, they're coming from another agency and they say they never talk to us. they, they
That's a
they'd
hard
send
one.
us a
Yeah.
they'd send us this 17-page PDF report at the start of every month. We have no idea what a good click-through rate is or what a good conversion rate is. Like, what
Right.
is all this? What does all this mean? And so one of the things
Hmm.
that we really do is really insist on talking to each of our customers once a month to be able to talk
Yeah.
through like the business side of things, because we can be seeing one thing in Google Ads, but we want to make sure that it's actually turning into revenue and clients on your side. So I think that communication piece is
Absolutely.
really big, and those places that they're usually going to say, oh yeah, we'll run your Google Ads for $200 a month, and we'll send you this one report at the start of the month. That's not a really good recipe for success, and that's the one to kind of run away from.
Yeah. Oh no, I love that. Thank you. Because yeah, you have to be able to see what is being done. Whether that's a live dashboard that can report on stuff, or like you said, being able to have access or own your Google account, being able to see what's happening is absolutely critical. And you're right, that communication piece. We have so many clients that are like, great, you gave me a bunch of numbers. I hired you to be the expert to tell me what these numbers mean. And that I think is a huge responsibility for us as agency owners and agencies is to make sure that we're bringing that expertise to the clients, helping them understand. I used to laugh with our dental clients, like, I don't need to understand, you don't need to understand marketing terminology. I don't need to understand dental technology, past a certain point because you don't want
Right.
me drilling on your teeth. And you don't, yeah, I don't want you marketing. It's just, and that's, you hire the right expert to do the right thing. And I love how you guys have niched down and really owned that in that thing. And so thank you for sharing those tips with our listeners. I think those are really important and valuable ones.
Yeah, and when you hire that expert, ultimately, I think that the one of the big things is to, once you hire them, is to listen to them and not to say,
Hmm.
well, I don't want to do that to my website. Because
Right.
I've worked really hard on making that website myself, and but it's not getting the job done in some cases. So, and listening
Right.
to that expert, and it's like if you hire an accountant or a lawyer, listen to their advice, and don't just go, well, I don't think that's right. I'm just going to go do my own thing. That usually
Mhm.
that's going to lead you into a bad place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great point. Well, thank you so much, John, for sharing your valuable time with me and with our listeners today. This has just been a fantastic conversation, just sharing your insight. It's always wonderful to get to talk to a fellow marketer. So if our listeners want to reach out to you and find out more about what you do and what's the best way to connect with you?
Sure, you guys can just go out to revkey.com. That's RevKey.com/podcast. You can see some of the other podcasts I've been on, and you can, do what we're constantly trying to get you guys, for your users to do is, click on that contact form and schedule a meeting with us, and we can help talk through your, marketing priorities and figure out how we can make Google Ads work for your specific practice.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, thank you to all your listeners and viewers, depending on what platform you're joining us today on this episode of the Beacon Way podcast with John. And so we're going to wrap up today, but we hope you come back and join us for the next episode. And if you like the kind of content we're sharing today, for those of you on YouTube, you know the drill. Click that like and subscribe button and get our constant updates for more tips like what we shared today. So thank you guys all for joining us. We look forward to having you next time.
You have been listening to the Beacon Way podcast. Make sure to join us for new episodes every week. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Beacon Way on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.